The palace was silent for months. There were wild hypotheses, rumors, and headlines, but nothing happened. But now, after years of rising tension and whispered ultimatums, William, Prince of Wales, has finally spoken. And his remarks have caused tremors to reverberate across the Atlantic and through royal corridors. The decision wasn't entirely final. It was devastating. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any updates before we delve further into what this actually implies for the royal family. It didn't begin with huge announcements or press conferences. It started quietly, aside from the cameras, in private communications and subtle gestures that pointed to one indisputable reality. Meghan Markle desired to return. From Mayfair to Montecito, rumors started to circulate that Meghan had started covert efforts at reconciliation. Not via Harry, not through PR firms, but through private emissaries. Furthermore, she wasn't looking for forgiveness. It was a return. At first, the response inside the palace was hesitancy. After all, the Sussexes had been a lightning rod for scandal since stepping back. However, no decision was made right away, even behind closed doors. Some advisors encouraged caution, noting that a properly handled return may actually help the royal image globally. Others worried that any type of return could shatter the delicate peace that had just barely been restored within the firm. However, Williams, the one voice that counted most, said nothing at all, so far. The moment Prince William requested a private session with his father, King Charles III, sirens went out. Not in a dramatic way, but rather in the subtle protocol changes that only insiders are aware of. William rarely did this, and when he did, it was a sign of impending seismic activity. The gathering was neither lengthy nor boisterous, according to people close to the family. It was sharply clear, serene, and composed. William made his stance public for the first time. Why now? Every royal insider has that question on their minds. Some claim that Meghan's subtle attempts to change her story drove him to the brink. Others suggest a deeper motive, one buried in a moment from the past that had never really healed. But whatever the cause, William's decision was neither hurried nor emotional. It was calculated, cold, final. Palace aides describe his tone as both uncompromising and intensely personal. William mentioned years of deterioration, according to one source, saying that reconciliation without accountability is only repetition. He made it clear that this wasn't about media myths or family dynamics. This has to do with his role in protecting the monarchy and its future. And underlying that drive was something even more disturbing, a notion that something had occurred behind the scenes. Something awful. Insiders won't say what. Not quite yet. However, they make reference to an event, a message, or a realization that fundamentally altered William's life. Whatever it was, it changed a Cold War into something irrevocable. But before this sentence was ever pronounced aloud, a tempest had been gathering behind palace walls. A storm based on silence, betrayal, and a past that neither side could escape. The public witnessed a couple leaving. William, however, experienced something quite different behind the scenes: abandonment. Meghan's exit was more than just a news story. It was injured, and no one could have predicted how deeply it cut. From the moment the Sussexes announced their exit, the world was plunged into pandemonium. However, something much more intimate had already come apart inside the palace, behind those tall walls and tighter silences. For William, this wasn't simply about a modern couple rejecting tradition. It was about betrayal. In a worldwide spectacle, the monarchy he had dedicated his life to protecting had been dragged through the mud. Even though his brother was in the middle, Meghan's voice was the loudest. The Oprah interview didn't simply break the surface, it blasted it. William perceived Meghan's veiled allegations and emotional, indirect remarks as direct insults to the organization he had grown up learning to defend. Even though she didn't specify names, it was clear from the shadows in her words who she was referring to. Meghan, rightly or not, was viewed by William as the spark that ignited the fire, shattering the sense of responsibility that had once bound the brothers together. Privately, the split between Catherine and Meghan had been building long before the cameras noticed. Catherine remained calm during those last royal appearances. However, the atmosphere was described by insiders as tight, frigid, and unsaid. A curt nod, a forced grin. Everything was sensed, yet it wasn't overt. Behind closed doors, it was far worse. Catherine allegedly sobbed as she left certain gatherings, unable to comprehend the abrupt breakdown of what should have been a united future. What started as a common vision between two couples, the so-called Fab Four, was now a battleground of whispered grievances and emotional withdrawal. The biggest wound, however, was the breakdown of William and Harry's relationship. Raised side by side through tragedy, connected by their mother's memory, they had endured everything until now. William, once a protective older brother, had become something else in Harry's eyes, a representation of the very system they had questioned together. And Meghan, whether she intended it or not, became the line between them. A line that got sharper, colder, and eventually irreversible. Meghan's quiet was more powerful than any words at certain crucial times. Her chilly detachment from important family occasions, her delayed pronouncements during national crises, and her absence at royal funerals. Palace aides said it all felt intentional, calculated, not out of fear, but as a declaration. Meghan wasn't waiting for an invitation, she was dismissing the entire table. And it was that rejection that William could never reconcile. This wasn't just family drama to him. It was a betrayal of confidence and a challenge to all he had grown up to defend. One staffer recounted William's statements during a private debrief. Publicly, the line was not crossed. Long ago it was crossed. We just refused to see it. However, lines are not always hidden. Even so, a recent event would compel William to act for the crown's future rather than for himself, even as old scars festered. Gentle clues, appearances at charity galas, endorsements for British organizations, and a gentle transformation of her public persona. No big interviews or public declarations. Meghan took her time entering. She was repositioning and the palace saw it coming. After months of seclusion and emotional consequences, Meghan Markle began to re-emerge, but not with the fire and fury many expected. There was no orchestrated media blitz or scorched earth reveal. Instead, what occurred was something considerably more deliberate, a campaign of image rehabilitation, clad in benevolence. She began attending events focusing on mental health and women's empowerment topics near to her heart, certainly, but also tightly related to the late Queen's legacy. Her well-chosen words and purposeful presence were constructing a return rather than a comeback. And not just any return, but one based on responsibility, service, and dignity. It was not overlooked. Meghan quietly re-established connections with charities in the UK that she had previously supported. In interviews, she extolled the virtues of British culture, made anonymous donations to London-based projects, and even mentioned the strong connection she still had with British citizens. To the casual viewer, it was subtle. To the palace, it was seismic. Red flags had already been erected within Kensington Palace. Advisors began watching her activities not in paranoia, but in preparedness. Leaked texts hinted at something deeper. According to various sources, Meghan has shown desire in returning to the UK, but this time on her terms. No titles, no limitations, no palace customs. Just a woman reclaiming a stage she previously walked away from. She didn't want to beg for approval. She wanted to command attention, and she was quite capable of doing it. The British tabloids swiftly figured it out. According to headlines, Meghan might show up unexpectedly by herself at a next royal memory service. Courtiers were shocked when they heard her name whispered in royal seating charts. The story started to gain traction. Was Meghan returning through reinvention rather than reconciliation? This wasn't only about the past anymore. This was about power, influence, Redemption. Meghan didn't move erratically. They had been planned. Every speech on perseverance, every profile in global magazines, every talk of legacy. It all goes to her. Returning to a woman, gradually regaining her place in the public eye as more than just Harry's spouse. She was constructing her own monarchy in the court of global opinion. William's close circle observed in silence, but not in stillness. They were aware that her return would become an uncontrollable reality if it wasn't resolved quickly. The optics alone of Meghan standing at a royal podium, when old wounds still festered, would destroy the delicate line they had spent years attempting to heal. There were growing concerns that her attendance at even one royal function may rekindle animosity within the family and among the general public. The barrier between duty and drama would blur once more. But Meghan wasn't just banging at the door, she was shifting so that she could pass right through it. And a daring proposition that would make William reevaluate his allegiance changed everything just as the palace was getting ready for tactful diplomacy. It came through back channels, respectful in tone, but bold in intent. Meghan Markle formally sought to rejoin select royal events. The request was explicit, symbolic, and astonishing. There was silence in the room. Then came the reaction. Protocol, not headlines, brought the proposition to fruition. It was carefully phrased, referencing service, responsibility, and the monarchy's changing role in the contemporary world. Meghan's request wasn't for reinstatement, nor was it an apology. It was a statement of intent. She desired to participate in carefully selected royal ceremonies that coincided with her personal concerns. She had already made a name for herself internationally in the fields of mental health, women's rights, and youth empowerment. However, it was unprecedented in the firm's context, and for many inside the palace, that was unacceptable. The first response was incredulity. Royal advisors' briefings were filled with a mixture of calm indignation and bewilderment. Meghan wasn't asking to get back into royal life. She was proposing to collaborate as if the past could be wiped away by good intentions. The tone may have been refined, but the message was plain. She desired to re-enter under a different story and on her own terms. It wasn't a plea for redemption. It was a calculated desire for relevance. When the royal inner circle assembled to debate it, Catherine, Princess of Wales, was reportedly the first to speak. Her words sliced through the room with silent wrath. Not after everything. It wasn't theatrical. It was real. For Catherine. The agony hadn't dissipated. The memories of stressful occurrences, chilly silences, and emotional wounds still lingered. Any return would also mean reopening wounds that had only recently started to heal for her. Ever the king caught between tradition and innovation, Charles III was in a precarious situation. On one hand, unity. Legacy, on the other hand. After a lifetime of yearning to take the helm, he inherited a broken family and a collapsing public trust. He grasped the power of symbolism. Allowing Meghan back, even partially, may restore some worldwide goodwill. However, it might also weaken the monarchy's internal base. He couldn't make the choice on his own. It had to come from the man who would one day sit on the throne. William was quick to respond. No feeling. Without hesitation. He was described by many in the room as measured, unyielding, and stone-faced. Every point was heard by him. Every argument. Then he said one sentence that stopped everyone. This isn't about forgiveness. It's about consequence. With those words, the tone switched drastically. This wasn't just a refuse. It was a reckoning. The heir to the throne had drawn a line, and this time there would be no crossing it. The room comprehended. The weight of years of conflict, betrayal, and hidden conflicts had now crystallized into action. William hadn't just responded a request, he had established a limit for the monarchy. And it wasn't just Meghan who would feel its impact. For years to come, it would alter the royal family's power dynamics. However, William would not take a reactive approach in the future. It would be decisive. and it would come in the guise of a verdict no king had dared issue before. The heir to the throne signed the confidential letter, which was delivered by hand and read aloud to a small group of people. Not only was Meghan's application for re-entry rejected, it was completely destroyed. Meghan was left on the other side of William's line in the sand. The point was delivered precisely rather than dramatically. A sealed envelope carrying William's personal crest, addressed through proper procedures, and dispatched with royal discretion. What lay inside wasn't just a reaction, it was a declaration, a decision influenced by years of quiet injuries and cautious caution. And now, the constraint was gone. Insiders viewed William's remarks as unreservedly definitive. There was no room for ambiguity, no margin for interpretation. It was the language of a future monarch who was setting firm boundaries. The letter opened with courtesy, but it was a facade. Beneath the courtesy was cold steel. William wrote about duty, legacy, and consequence. He did not attack Meghan directly, but his language was razor keen. He noted an irreversible breach of confidence and warned that reopening the past would jeopardize the integrity of the monarchy. There was no olive branch, no suggestion of future discussion. This was closure, but not the type that brings serenity. This was a door slammed shut with regal authority. The references, which only those closest to him would understand, made it more eerie and intimate. William evoked the legacy of Princess Diana not to draw pity, but to root his decision in something deeper. He wrote of preserving her legacy not through spectacle, but through steadiness. He referenced the future of Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis. He wrote as a father as well as a prince, a parent shielding the next generation from the anarchy that once wrecked his own. The line that supposedly broke the stillness in the room came next. His steadfast determination to shield Catherine from additional psychological harm, brought on by unresolved public disputes. Those who read the letter said it was apparent William saw this not as a family dispute, but as a challenge to the fundamental foundation he was pledged to preserve. Additionally, Catherine would no longer be a victim of palace politics while she continued to heal from the past. When Meghan received wind of the verdict, people close to her say she was blindsided and distraught. She had anticipated resistance, but not finality. Not this. The decision felt like a personal banishment, not from duty, but from any potential reconciliation, for a woman who had previously transformed public perception through fortitude and tenacity. The ensuing hush was deafening, but it was short-lived. The letter was leaked. It was meant solely for royal eyes. Whether by purpose or betrayal, it made its way into the hands of the press, and when it surfaced, the headlines erupted. Meghan is silenced by William. The palace was split, final blow to royal unity. Social media erupted. Opinion storms were sparked by supporters on both sides. Once more, the monarchy was the focal point of an international show. Only this time, the attack hadn't come from outside. It had originated inside. And yet, even as the verdict went public, not everyone within the palace agreed, and one voice rang out in disagreement. Charles III once called Harry and Meghan treasured family. The king was now left with a difficult decision when one son drew a hard border: stand by his heir, or open the door to reconciliation. The monarchy has always been a symbol of unification, a beacon of order amidst chaos. But for Charles, this encounter broke that fantasy. He was a father as well as a monarch, a father observing his sons grow far from him, a father seeing his family fall under the weight of quiet pride and societal expectation. William's conclusion had landed like a hammer, decisive, strong, and unyielding, and Charles, caught in the aftershock, found himself stuck between blood and duty. Charles had avoided confrontation for decades. He preferred quiet negotiations to loud ultimatums. The people who knew him the best said that instead of fighting fires, he avoided them. But now the fire was inside the palace. Continuity is the cornerstone of his reign stability. The very individuals who held his name posed a threat to the appearance of control. Privately, the heartbreak was great. Charles had long thought the passage of time would restore what had been broken. The hope was that William and Harry would return, that Meghan might one day return not as a headline, but as a family member. However, that prospect had been eliminated by William's letter. It was a rejection, rather than merely an answer. Not just of Meghan, but of any idea that the past might be altered. The political cost of siding with Meghan now was huge. William was more than a son. He represented the future. It would be a disintegration of the crown from within, to publicly oppose the heir to the throne, the face of a modernized monarchy. Still, to remain silent felt like betrayal, not only to Harry and Meghan, but to the ideas Charles had long professed to stood for: compassion, inclusivity, redemption. Queen Camilla had a significant impact behind the scenes. She reportedly persuaded Charles to stand firmly by William's side. She had a practical perspective. The family's attempts to rebuild would be hampered by Meghan's homecoming, which would only rekindle debate. In that chamber, between the burden of the throne and the pain of parenthood, Charles listened to her reminder that kings sometimes had to choose the crown over the cradle. Still, Meghan had not gone silent. Through intermediaries, she conveyed messages not of wrath but of plea, not begging but asking, for a possibility, for understanding, for recognition. It wasn't a publicity gimmick. It was peaceful, secluded, heartfelt, and it reached Charles at a moment when his heart was already divided. He didn't answer, not in words, not publicly, not privately. The king, who was always supposed to be the voice of reason, decided to remain silent. But in that silence, 1,000 meanings were born. To some, it was strength, cowardice; to others, for many, it was also the last word that reconciliation was out of the question. However, the ruling affected the memories of an entire country, not simply the homecoming of one individual, and the public rendered its own judgment in the shadow of the throne. The planet split in two in a matter of hours. Hashtags took off, talk programs came to life, and the streets of London swirled with divided whispers. Was William sabotaging the future of the monarchy or preserving it? The moment the letter leaked, it stopped being a family concern. It became a cultural war. Across Britain, a line was drawn, not along party lines, but generational, emotional, ideological. Royal loyalists lauded William's choice as principled, overdue, and necessary. To them, he had done what no monarch in waiting dared to do before: enforce a standard. He was defending the crown, not punishing Meghan. To an increasingly worldwide chorus, however, it seemed like something else. The ruling was viewed by progressive voices, particularly those from younger demographics, as icy, outdated, and intensely personal. They didn't see a prince sketching a boundary. They witnessed a brother smashing a door. The concept that reconciliation had been denied so publicly caused shockwaves far beyond the palace walls. Within days, the headlines went global. American media reports labeled William as uncompromising, inflexible, even vindictive. The story took on a life of its own, detached from fact, driven by emotion. Celebrities made statements in response. Monologues were posted by influencers. The royal feud was transformed into primetime commentary by talk show presenters. One part presented Meghan as the everlasting outsider, forever suppressed by an unwelcoming system. William was portrayed as the final defender of royal tradition by the other half, who united behind him. The rejection became a symbol of power rather than just a personal one: race, patriarchy, and present relevance. Opinion surveys began moving in real time. While support for the monarchy increased among older generations, It declined among younger voters. Republican sentiment reappeared in Scotland. In America, enthusiasm for Meghan rose. And all the while, Kensington Palace offered no more word. But Catherine, Princess of Wales, appeared in public twice in the following days, once at a children's hospital and once at a veterans' memorial. She remained silent. She didn't have to. Her appearances were said to, as coded by analysts, designed to reflect resilience, motherhood, and calm dignity. She became a silent icon in a conflict of narratives, whether she intended to or not. Beneath the surface, the division was no longer just about family. It has to do with identity. Meghan was seen by some as disruptive change, yes, but necessary. She was seen by others as chaotic, a danger to tradition and order. William, by contrast, was either the protector of that structure or the architect of a future collapse, depending on who you asked. The monarchy had survived centuries of scandal, but few were prepared for the scale of this breakdown. And amid the inferno, one thing became evident. Legacy was no longer the only thing the royal family had to deal with. They were locked in a cultural reckoning. The old codes of silence, allegiance, and internal settlement no longer work. In a world that demanded openness and sides, neutrality was not an option. And as the world debated, Meghan faded from view, but not for long. A hurricane was building across the Atlantic. She could have said nothing. She had the option to back off. Rather, Meghan Markle performed in New York rather than London. Additionally, her words conveyed a clear message. She had not finished yet. After weeks of silence, of tabloids dissecting her rejection, and detractors evaluating her character, Meghan emerged into the spotlight once more, but not as a princess, not as a victim, as a woman with something to say. Leaders, activists, and change-makers from around the world attended the high-profile Women's Summit. Her appearance was unannounced, her presence unmistakable. Meghan gave a keynote address that resonated like lightning on both sides of the Atlantic, dressed not in titles or symbolism, but in passion. Her speech wasn't direct, but it didn't need to be. She spoke about duty without chains, with measured composure, and the guts it takes to speak your truth, even if the truth is unpleasant. She discussed the influence of legacy and how it isn't something we inherit, it's something we shaped. Every phrase felt purposeful, every pause a statement. And though she never once referenced the monarchy by name, the overtones were overwhelming. By the time she moved away from the podium, the audience was already rising to its feet. A full standing ovation, the kind reserved not just for performance, but for defiance. Meghan didn't appeal for sympathy. She claimed space, on her own terms, in her own voice. Additionally, the scene was instantaneously memorialized on social media. Royalty in exile, voice unchained. Like wildfire, speculation broke out. Was this speech a response to William's verdict? Was the door shut on her return because of an open letter to the family? Some observers complimented her for elegance under fire. Others accused her of planned retribution. But even her sharpest enemies had to agree Meghan knew how to command a stage. The story was reframed by headlines in the days that followed. Meghan wasn't the castaway. She was the disruptor, a lady no longer asking to belong, but carving out a crownless kingdom of her own. And behind the scenes, additional whispers fanned rumors of a memoir in the works, one more personal and searing than anything before. The royal family was incorrect if they believed they had heard the last of her. Meghan would not hold back this time. Buckingham Palace advisors fumbled, not because they worried what Meghan would say, but because they now knew how much louder her voice had become outside their boundaries. With no procedure to control her, no allegiance to temper her, she was now a sovereign force in global narrative. And her story had only just begun. However, when Meghan stood up to speak again, a final turn of events within the palace threatened to ruin everything. For years, Catherine, Princess of Wales, was silent, faithful, collected, the perfect royal. But beneath the smiles lurked a maelstrom of suppressed grief, and one night she finally let it out. Her words would haunt William forever. It was late. The house was quiet. And in the calm, Catherine finally broke. What had been accumulating for months, nay years, poured out in a flood of shivering reality. The stoic facade, the polished public appearances, the silent nods to dignity. One breath, and it was all destroyed. Her voice cracked as she said what she'd never dared to speak before. For all of us, you put an end to it. William didn't speak. He didn't have to. Because at that moment, the weight of what he had done, what he had determined, what he had closed, slammed down about him like thunder. Catherine wasn't accusing him out of malice. She wasn't angry. She was worn out. From bearing the mental burden of a war she never requested to be a part of, not from the press or gossip. She revealed to him what she had kept hidden for far too long, that every rumor, every public jab, every pointed headline had taken something from her, that the children, George, Charlotte, and Louis, were growing up in a world where their family was a war, and that the tension buzzing behind palace doors was something that no amount of royal titles or custom could protect them from. Catherine had made every effort to keep them safe, tried to pretend, but the lie was breaking her. Then came the revelation. William didn't expect. Catherine had previously tried privately, away from photographers and courtiers, to make peace with Meghan. She made contact as a woman, a mother, and a sister-in-law, rather than as a princess. When no one else was there, she offered a discreet olive branch, but it was welcomed not with warmth, but with quiet. That silence, she acknowledged, felt like a final blow she never spoke about until now. William stood frozen. Aides later described it as shattered. As Catherine sobbed, he remained silent. He didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. Because deep inside, he knew. Every decision he had made to defend the crown had come at a cost, and now he could see that cost coming apart. Not on television, not in the press, but in the eyes of the lady who had stood alongside him, through everything. Later that night, when the mansion had gone silent again, William was observed in one of the secret galleries alone. He stood beside a portrait of Diana, his mother, beginning as a son rather than a prince or a future monarch, as a man yearning for direction from the one voice he'd never hear again. The question hung in the air, jarring the stillness of the room. What would she have done? And as the crown prepares for its new chapter, one thing is apparent. The battle for the soul of the monarchy is far from over. It's only just begun. I appreciate you watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.